Hey everybody. So we're back. I just wanted to make a kind of a quick video over a couple of problems from the 5.2 that I wanted to go over real quick. There were actually a couple of the earlier ones. Actually, this first one that gave some people some grief. So this is a cool one. There are a few different ways to do this, and I kind of saw two main strategies. So I guess I'll go over kind of first that if you just jump straight into writing this in terms of sine and cosine. So if you do that, the cotangent is cosine over sine. And then here, cotangent is cosine over sine. And really, I'm doing 1 divided by that. So this is really, if I do multiply by the reciprocal, this is really cosine theta over sine theta plus sine theta over cosine theta. Now, you could pause it. Another way to think about it is 1 over cotangent is just tangent. And tangent is sine over cosine. So if you want to think about it like that too, either way, if you write everything originally in terms of sine or cosine, you would get this. But then I would need a common denominator to go ahead and go through and add those. Okay. So here's sine, here's cosine. I would need to multiply this guy by cosine. I would need to multiply this guy by sine. And then that way, if I add them together, I've got cosine times cosine is cosine squared over cosine times sine plus sine squared over cosine times sine. And then I would add those fractions together. So what I've got is cosine squared plus sine squared over cosine times sine. Of course, we know that cosine squared plus sine squared is just 1. So I got 1 over cosine times sine. And 1 over cosine is secant, 1 over sine is cosecant. So really we've got secant times cosecant or cosecant times secant. Either way I want to write that. And some people got to this point, that was fine. Didn't rewrite it like this. Either one of these answers is fine here. But this was kind of the main idea. If I write everything in terms of sine and cosine first, okay, I would go from here to here. Okay, what if I don't do that? Well, some of you did this way, which was great. And it is easier, okay? And I don't have any issue with it at all. So, eventually you need to get it in terms of sine and cosine, but maybe I go ahead and add these first, cotangent plus 1 over cotangent, right? So maybe I put this guy over 1, and then to get a common denominator here, I would have to multiply by cotangent, just on this fraction, right? So I do something like that. And then I would have cotangent squared over cotangent plus 1 over cotangent. And then I add these together. So I've got cotangent squared plus 1 over cotangent. And then you noticed right there that the cotangent squared plus 1 was cosecant squared. So I've got cosecant squared over cotangent. And then it was at that point you said, okay, well, now I can write everything in terms of sine and cosine. So cosecant squared, that guy was 1 over sine squared. And then my fraction bar was right here. And we know that cotangent was cosine over sine. Multiply by the reciprocal. 1 over sine squared times sine over cosine. You did notice that one of the signs cancels. So sine over sine squared, I can cancel out one of those signs. So I get the 1 over sine cosine, which is the cosecant secant that we were after. Okay. Does it matter which approach I take? No. And there are other ones too, right? Um, but you can't really do it without using the writing in terms of sine and cosine at some point or another, whether or not you do it first or you do it later. Okay, on this one, you've seen other ones where you don't have to write in terms of sine or cosine at all. That was number one. So that was actually one of the harder ones possibly that we had on there. It was the very first problem. Number 8 also caused some issues. So I just want to go through a solution of that one and how I would like it written out. Not everybody kind of wrote it out how I wanted you to. I usually hope for the best as far as if I see a line to another line, I'm like, do you really understand? But if you can show us in much detail as possible, that way I know for sure that you're understanding, okay? Because sometimes even I've done this before, back when I was a student kid, I'd kid myself into thinking I understood when I really didn't. So it's kind of making sure that we understand every single step, okay? So here, to get a common denominator, on this one I've got sine, on this one I've got 1 plus cosine, and I would just get a common denominator. To do that, and not everybody did this the right way, I would need to multiply this guy by 1 plus cosine here, and I would need to multiply this one by sine. And now I've got a common denominator, and I can add those fractions. So let me just kind of write out what we would have, okay? So we've got 1 plus cosine times cosine plus sine squared. And then over 1 plus cosine times sine. Now, what you can't do is cancel. Some of you were improperly canceling terms. I need to simplify that numerator and then, see if I can simplify anything, cancel out any factors. So what I have in the numerator is cosine plus cosine squared, if I distribute this guy, plus sine squared over 1 plus cosine times sine. Okay, so you see right here I've got cosine squared plus sine squared, and that together is just going to make 1. So this part is just 1. So I really have cosine theta plus 1 over 1 plus cosine theta sine theta. And then once you get to that point, which some of you did, which is great, you notice that these two factors are the same. So this factor and this factor can be canceled out because they're identical. So if I do that, I end up with 1 over sine theta, which even better, cosecant theta as an answer, out of what we had there originally, which looked like a big mess. Okay? So this is kind of neat. I add these two fractions together with sine and cosine, and I end up with this. I wouldn't have guessed that. So that's kind of cool thing about simplifying these trig expressions. Okay, so that was kind of the two that I wanted to look at the most. But if you got any other questions, just feel free to ask me. And we're going to do some more of a 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, 5.5 today. So bear with me on this week. We do have a lot to do. I'll explain as we go on, but yeah, sorry.